The line outside the club stretched beneath the dripping neon light, wrapping around the block like a serpent coiling in the night. Creatures of all shapes and sizes, some wearing their glamour to blend in with mortals, gathered impatiently, desperate to indulge in the city's most forbidden pleasures. The burn of magical wards over the doorway flickered in shifting colors, signaling that each patron would be subject to scrutiny, magical and otherwise, before gaining entrance. Racing himself against the doorframe stood Hakan, the half-giant bouncer, arms thick like old oak beams and shoulders like the slopes of a mountain. Among the swirl of illusions and the labyrinth of alliances, he was the sentinel, an honest bristling mass of muscle who spoke in measured syllables and broke up fights with a calm but unyielding hand. His father had been a towering giant from the northern ranges, his mother a human from the city. Though he'd been born close to human height, a massive growth spurt in his youth set him squarely between both worlds, large enough to intimidate, but not large enough to scare away every potential friend. Years of working at the city's most notorious supernatural club had refined his approach to dealing with the restless hordes. He didn't exactly relish conflict, but he possessed a natural inclination, maybe it was paternal instinct, packed into a formidable form to settle arguments before they became knockdown, drag-out magical brawls. "Next," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut effortlessly through idle chatter. A pair of pixies, shimmering in the light, fluttered to the front. Their wings sparkled with a subtle dust that promised illusions if they chose to wave their little wands, but they didn't. They were known troublemakers, but harmless as far as Hakan could tell. He inspected them with a quick, knowing glance. They hadn't caused massive havoc, not yet, anyway. Often, all it took was a stern stare. "Behave," he said simply, and waved them through the intangible wards. The lines of magical script over the doorframe glowed at their entry, verifying that they carried no forbidden artifacts. They blew him a kiss, giggling as they vanished inside. A pair of werewolves came next, towering over the other creatures, even in their partially human forms. One had a wide grin that revealed slightly elongated canines. The other looked far more serious. They flexed, as though itching to tear into something. Werewolves were known for territorial arguments, and within the tight confines of the club, that tension was bound to ignite at some point. Still, Hakan held up a massive hand. "You two, elbows in, no growling, keep the shift mild," he told them. "I hear you messing with vampires or witches again, and you're out. Understand?" The more serious one nodded, briefly meeting Hakan's gaze, an act of reluctant respect. They moved on, stepping beyond the door's threshold. Already, the pulsing bass inside vibrated through the walls. Mingling with the magical hum of wards, the next in line was a tall man draped in a crispy black coat, his eyes flickering red. Typically a sign of a vampire. Hakan offered him a courteous nod. Once the last prospective patrons were through, Hakan shut the outer entrance. By that point, the capacity reached its limit, and he could hear his manager calling over the radio that they were at max. He exhaled, stepping inside to where the real work began. Making sure the supernatural guests stayed in line. The moment he walked through the threshold, the whole atmosphere hit him in a wave. Tabletop illusions of dancing flames hovered in the corners. The bar was a swath of color-changed potions masquerading as mortal drinks, and the dance floor was a swirling mosaic of species. The DJ, a two-headed worm in humanoid disguise, was spinning an otherworldly track that reverberated down to the foundations. Meanwhile, the bartender, a harpy with glimmering wings, poured out cocktails of pink and green neon for a group of witches in pointed hats. When Hakan stepped closer to the bar, the witches gave him an appreciative once-overs, but quickly noted his stern expression and returned to their drinks. In one corner, near the stage where lesser demons were performing a sizzling dance routine, Hakan found his first dispute of the night. A tall elf, with aristocratic posture, was nose-to-nose with a werewolf. The werewolf's teeth were bared, but the tension in the elf's slender hands suggested he was about to fling a magical bolt. Ears perked, Hakan strode over. "All right," he said quietly, stepping between them. "This isn't a place for brawls. We'll get this settled in a civilized manner." His presence was enormous enough to force them to move back. "What's the problem?" The werewolf growled deep in his throat. "He's stepping on my territory in the VIP lounge, trying to hustle in on a business deal with the Night Fae." The elf's arms rose in elegant frustration. "We had an arrangement with the Fae, negotiated weeks ago. You just barged in with your clan growling threats. We don't respond well to blackmail." "A direct approach would only add sparks to the powder keg." Haken looked between them with a slow, measured sweep. "Let's do it this way. Take your conversation to one of the private booths behind the stage. I'll oversee it personally. No magic, no claws." They glared at each other but complied, following Haken deeper into the club, past swirling illusions and columns of smoke. The private booth was a soundproof glass cube, a place to hash out differences without the rest of the club listening in. Hakan took up the seat that was usually reserved for major negotiations, a plush couch that barely fit his size. He had to prop one leg to the side. "All right," he began, letting his voice resonate through the room. "This is how we'll handle it. Each of you states your claim, no interruptions allowed. Then we find a compromise. If either of you tries any tricks, I'll see you out personally." Arms folded, the werewolf let the elf speak first. The elf explained a centuries-old arrangement between his clan and the Fae, a relationship built on trade in illusions for rare potions. The werewolf insisted the arrangement was broken the moment the elf demanded higher prices for the illusions, and that was when the wolf clan stepped in, offering something more beneficial to the Fae. As they spoke, Haken studied their body language. Over the years, he'd learned to read micro-expressions, pick up on magical fluctuations, even sense illusion. The werewolf's hackles were raised, but not in pure anger. He felt threatened by the sophisticated elf's cunning. The elf's gaze darted side to side, as if plotting an escape route, rather than unleashing a magical blow. They weren't beyond reason. All they needed was a swift resolution to save face. "Here's the solution," Haken said. "Elves hold onto the illusions discount for the full length of the original contract. Wolf Clan gets the next cycle if they add something of value to the mix, maybe a new resource or territory that the Fae want. Is that workable?" They shot each other uncertain looks, but Hakan's presence was a quiet, immovable force, pressing them to find common ground. Finally, the werewolf nodded, the elf shrugged, and an agreement was struck. "Good. Now shake on it." They gave each other a tense handshake. Haken gave them a resolute smile. "Keep it civil in the club." The door hissed open, and they stepped out into the swirl of lights, returning to their respective domains. Another crisis averted. He strode back along the dance floor. Everywhere he looked, there was a spectacle. A trio of sirens singing hypnotic melodies, a gargoyle perched on a lounge chair, Gorgon twins sipping drinks through serpent straws, and a handful of ghosts drifting above the walkways. Haken recalled the first few nights when he grew accustomed to mediating supernatural tensions. He had nearly lost track of the shapeshifters who'd slip into the VIP lounge, or illusions that disguised a scuffle until it erupted into a small-scale war. But with experience and unstoppable patience, he found his path as the club's anchor of reason. In the central area, a group of vampires, all dressed in sleek black suits, huddled around a bottle of shimmering red fluid. He sensed something off. Maybe they'd brought in contraband, or maybe it was just an extra potent drink. Creeping forward with surprising subtlety for a man his size, he overheard the hushed conversation. One of the vampires mentioned a fresh supply, the words lined with sly excitement. A warning bell rang in Haken's mind. Fresh supply often meant crossing boundaries, especially if they fed on living humans without their consent. Carefully, Haken stepped into their circle. "Evening," he said, voice low enough to not cause a stir. "Mind telling me what you have there?" He motioned to the red fluid. They exchanged glances. A tall raven-haired vampire with silver rings on every finger took the lead. It's a legal brand of synthetic blood, courtesy of a necro-alchemist. Harkon narrowed his eyes, scanning the bottle for magical enchantments. Slowly, the vampire handed it over. He gave it a swirl and watched thick rivulets cascade inside the glass. There was a faint, luminescent hue, meaning it was artificially crafted. He sniffed, detecting no trace of a living host mixed into it. "All right," he said, "just don't carry it outside of your VIP area and keep it away from unsuspecting patrons. Understood?" A few vampires nodded obediently. The lead one offered a respectful tilt of his head. They'd seen what happened to rule breakers who tested Haken's patience, shattered pride, bruised flesh, and, if necessary, a formal ban from the premise. Satisfied, Harkon returned the bottle, but not without a final glance that said, "I'm watching." He was about to head toward the bar when Felicia, a petite witch with hair dyed turquoise, rushed over, breathless. "Harkon, I need your help. There's a demon and an angel fighting in the back lounge." "Angel?" he repeated. Angels rarely came here, but once in a while a rebellious cherub or a fallen might slip in. "Show me." Felicia led him down the corridor, past the swirling illusions of pinwheel galaxies on the walls, to a quieter hallway behind the main dance floor. There, near a velvet rope, a demon with bright white horns and ashen skin bared his fangs at a figure dressed in holy vestments, bright light radiating off them like the glow of a halogen lamp. A literal halo hovered above their head, but it flickered as if struggling to remain lit in this den of shadows. The two were locked in a standoff, fists clenched, energies crackling in the air. "Hey," Harkon said, placing himself in the middle. The demon hissed, the angel scowled, and Felicia wisely stepped away. "What's the problem?" "She started it," the demon snarled, pointing a clawed finger at the angel. "Came at me with her sanctimonious routine, telling me to get out. She thinks my mere presence is an affront." The angel's voice was calm, but clipped. "He's wanted in 4 realms for infernal mischief. I can't simply abide him being here among unsuspecting souls." Harkon cleared his throat. "We don't ignore crime, no matter who commits it," he said evenly. "If there's a legitimate charge, you notify the local supernatural council. But this place is neutral ground, a zone for all who follow the club's rules. You don't come in here throwing accusations and picking fights." A scowl darkened the angel's luminous features. "I serve a higher cause than this club. You don't understand." "Maybe I don't," Harkon allowed. "But what I do understand is that we keep the peace here. Demon, if you're under suspicion of wrongdoing, that's your problem outside these walls. Angel, if you want him arrested, petition the council. But neither of you are fighting in my club." The demon folded his arms with a grin that revealed razor-sharp teeth. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted a drink. Let me enjoy the show and I'll see myself out, unless you've got a direct order to detain me." The angel bristled, flickers of her waning halo dimming further. "He's not worth my time." She gave a wary glance at Harkon, as if measuring how far she could push. Then she sighed, letting the tension fade. "Fine." With that, she turned on her heel and glided away, luminous robes trailing behind her. The demon smirked as if he'd won a victory, but as he started to slip into a formulaic bow, Harkon held up a warning finger. "I don't like troublemakers. Stick to the bar, and no deals that break club rules. Got it?" The demon nodded, still smirking, then slunk off toward the swirling lights. Felicia let out a shaky breath. "Thanks," she whispered. "Not sure how that would have ended without you." Harkon gave her a soft nod and resumed his patrol. Back on the main floor, the DJ had turned up the tempo, and the building throbbed with rhythms so heavy they rattled the bar stools. The swirl of motion, voices, and illusions would overwhelm most people, but Harkon had grown used to it. He saw the small conflicts brewing before they escalated. A drunken warlock leaning too close to a vampire's partner. A sly cat shifter trying to steal potions from an unguarded table. Step by step, he navigated, offering well-timed words or a subtle stare to halt problems in their tracks. In between the chaotic scuffles, Harkin found a rare moment to breathe near the bar. The harpy bartender gave him a grim smile. "Busy night?" He nodded. "They always are. And we haven't even hit midnight yet." She slid him a tall glass of something bright green. "Non-alcoholic brew from the Druids. Helps keep your wits, so I hear." Harkin took a sip. It tasted of mint and pine, refreshing enough to steady his nerves. He never drank anything too potent on the job. He knew better than to drop his guard in a place that could detonate into supernatural chaos at any second. Mid-sip, he felt a hand on his arm. A slender vampire in a blood-red dress looked up from beneath thick lashes. "You must be the famed half-giant. Want to dance?" Her voice dripped with a coy invitation. Hoikan smiled politely but shook his head. "Working," he said simply. She leaned in conspiratorially. "There's always time for a little fun, especially for the man who keeps us safe." Her voice lingered on the last word, implying more than just a dance. But her allure, while potent, was wasted on Hoikan, whose priorities didn't allow for distractions. He offered a soft apology and turned away to check the next commotion brewing near the stage. He heard her exhale in mild frustration, and then flit off through the crowd. Approaching the stage, he saw that a group of witches had spun up a swirl of illusions that clashed with the dancing demon performers. The illusions were overshadowing the dancers' pyrotechnics, leading to nasty glares from costumed demons. Hakan angled through the crowd, gently nudging flamboyant satyrs and a pair of goblins out of his path until he reached the witches. Oof. They caught sight of him and dimmed their illusions at once, though the swirl of coloured lights didn't vanish entirely. "We just wanted to liven up the performance," one said, half apologetic. He peered at the demon dancers on stage. One halted her fiery routine to glare. "We don't need outside illusions messing with our performance," she hissed. Ashlight flickered off her horns. Harkin raised a hand. "I get it. Everyone wants their moment in the spotlight. But don't overshadow the booked entertainment. Let the performers handle their own illusions." The witches nodded, letting the last swirling illusions fade. The demons resumed their dance, flames spinning in arcs, and the crowd erupted into applause. Another crisis quietly extinguished. When the clock struck midnight, the energy shifted. Patrons kept pouring onto the dance floor, and more trouble threatened at the edges. Hakan felt a slight tingle of dread. Witching hour. Old feuds often simmered until midnight, then ignited when magical energies peaked. Sure enough, a shriek cut through the music. He hurried past the swirling lights, spotting a swirling maelstrom of magic near the VIP lounge. Thick roots had burst from the floor, tangling around a screaming vampire and a furious dryad. The vampire clawed at the vines, while the dryad shouted that the vampire had threatened to drain the sap from her forest grove. The air crackled with hostility. Harkin stepped forward carefully, palms raised. "All right, settle down," he commanded. The dryad's eyes glowed green as the vines coiled tighter. The vampire bared his teeth. Without a moment's hesitation, Harkin reached down and grabbed the vines in his massive hands. His half-giant strength allowed him to yank them apart, freeing the vampire, though the vines resisted, thrashing like offended serpents. The dryad gasped, losing her focus momentarily, and the conjured roots receded. He was mocking my grove," she stammered, "threatening to feed on its lifeblood." The vampire, still dazed, sneered. "I didn't mean it. I was just teasing." Harkin took a measured breath. "Threats aren't jokes. You can't toss around talk of draining a living grove." He turned to the dryad, maintaining a level tone. "We don't trap or harm other patrons. If someone's disturbing you, you come to me or staff. Understood?" The dryad folded her bark-like arms, ironically resembling a tree trunk in her stance. She said nothing, but her expression was sullen. The vampire dusted himself off, rubbing a bruise that formed on his arm from the vines. Hakan loomed between them, ensuring there'd be no further outburst. Once he was satisfied, he gestured for them to go separate ways. Their eyes flicked away from each other as they retreated. Felicia appeared at Hakan's elbow again. She whispered, "Look." She pointed across the dance floor, where the elf from earlier had cornered a side fey near the bar, presumably about the same illusions contract. Hakan sighed. "I'll handle it," he said. He'd managed to negotiate a truce between the elf and the wolves, but apparently the elf had other entanglements to sort out. He threaded through a cluster of dancing ghosts, who parted like the wind before him. Reaching the elf, Hakan carefully inserted himself into conversation range. "Everything okay here?" The elf must have been mid-argument, for he pivoted sharply, eyes blazing with pent-up frustration, but upon seeing Hakan, he eased off. Nothing," the elf muttered. The sidey fey gave a subtle nod, relieved no doubt to have the half-giant's presence as a deterrent. The tension deflated with a single look from Hakan, who clasped the elf's shoulder with a surprisingly gentle grip for such a large hand. "You're on thin ice. You hash out problems in private, with me as mediator, or you go home. Clear?" Stiffly, the elf inclined his head. "Yes, of course." He slid away, disappearing into the throng of dancing patrons. The side Hefe cast Hakan a grateful smile and returned to sipping her luminescent glass of potion. At that point, the neon lights played on, strobing across the swirling forms of every supernatural creature imaginable. But Hakan glimpsed the faint beginnings of fatigue in some eyes. And wings. It was near closing time, when most of the guests had danced and drunk their fill. Even the wilder ones had simmered down, either trudging toward the door or slumping in booths to regain their composure. A tall clock by the bar chimed, signaling the final round. The DJ wound down the music into a softer, more ambient hum, a sign that it was time to settle tabs and head into the night. Hakan wandered to the front door, ready to usher out the last wave of patrons. Most left without a fuss. A gaggle of witches departed, giggling over illusions they might conjure later. The werewolves, surprisingly docile, gave Hakan a polite nod. The vampires in black suits drifted out like a funeral procession, their eyes reflecting the final flickers of overhead neon. Pixies fluttered by, their giggles trailing into the early morning air. Even the demon from earlier saluted Hakan with an amused grin as he vanished into the night, leaving behind a faint whiff of brimstone. The angel was nowhere in sight, having presumably flown off in righteous indignation. By the time the last stragglers moseyed out, the staff began cleaning tables littered with empty glasses, collecting leftover potion vials, and sweeping up bits of magical residue that glowed like dying fireflies. Hakan waited until every patron had stepped into the anonymity of the city's moonlit streets. Through the open doorway, he caught a glimpse of flickering street lamps and distant sirens. Another night, another storm of supernatural chaos, all forcibly contained within these walls. He shut the door behind the final guest and slumped against it, feeling the strain in his muscles. The clamoring in his mind eased as the dance floor went dark. Dim overhead lights revealed the battered but intact interior. Once again, he'd managed to guide a slew of monstrous egos toward a semblance of peace, all in a night's work. As he turned toward the empty dance floor, the manager passed by, patting his arm. "Great job tonight. We'd have had a real mess on our hands without you." Hakan, though weary, allowed himself a small grin of gratitude before setting off on a final sweep to ensure no one had lingered in the halls. When at last he was certain the place was empty, he headed to the staff room. The tension in his broad shoulders ebbed slightly, replaced by a mild satisfaction. A sense that, even if none of them were purely good or purely bad, he'd helped them coexist for just a few hours without bloodshed. In a world filled with supernatural storms, that counted for something. He pulled off his bouncer's vest and rubbed his neck. Tomorrow night, they would return, vampires hungry for new games, witches itching for mischief, demons and angels circling one another in their eternal dance, and countless more. And he would be here, standing tall at the threshold, resolving arguments and forging peace where possible. That was his role, his burden, and, strangely enough, his pride. For a man caught between mortal and giant, protecting a meeting ground of monsters felt like a small miracle. He'd found a place where he wasn't too large to be feared by everyone, nor too small to be overpowered. Instead, he was exactly what they needed. A fair but imposing shield that could stand between warring factions and say, "This ends here." And though his work brought bruises, headaches, and fleeting frustrations, he wouldn't trade it. Someone had to keep the club's chaotic heart beating without plunging into darkness. And so, as the last lights flickered off and the distant moonlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds, Hakan allowed himself a moment's rest. Tomorrow night would bring new feuds, new creatures stepping into the neon haze, each convinced they were entitled to rule the realm of the supernatural. He'd greet them all with the same steadfast resolve. In the end, that was the unspoken magic of the place. Not the illusions dancing on the stage, but the half-giant standing at the door, ready to wave them in and ensure none tore each other to ribbons. Satisfied, he locked up, stepped out into the cool pre-dawn air, and closed the door behind him. Shadows merged on the sidewalk, carrying away hints of starlight. A faint pulse of the city's hum remained. At his back stood the club, wards reactivated to slumber until the next evening. And in his chest, a weary but steady heartbeat, ready for whatever monsters tomorrow's night would bring.